Episode 2. If you haven't watched the first episode yet, I advise you to watch it first to understand the events of the story. You will find the first episode in the description, or in the channel. And that each day we faced would bring new challenges. But we were forced to continue. There was no other choice. I woke up on the 5th day with the same heavy feeling that had accompanied me throughout the past days. My body ached from all the walking and carrying equipment, but I had to ignore it. This is war, and this is the reality we have come to live. Our mission on the 5th day was a bit different. We were tasked with protecting a supply route that passed through a small village. We were warned that the Viet Cong used these villages as hideouts, and that we might face surprise attacks at any moment. We moved slowly through the village, trying not to instill fear in the local residents. Their looks were filled with caution and suspicion, and there was no communication between them and us. After hours of guard duty without any notable incident, I began to feel a sense of calm. But this calm was deceptive, as I knew very well that any moment could change everything. Suddenly, without warning, fire erupted from among the houses. The Viet Cong were hiding among the civilians, and they began shooting at us from every direction. We tried to respond, but the situation was extremely complicated. We were trying to distinguish between civilians and fighters, but the chaos was overwhelming. In those moments, I realized once again how harsh and unfair this war was. There were no boundaries, and there was no law governing what was happening. Everything was chaotic, and the only goal was to survive. After a prolonged clash, we managed to drive the Viet Cong out of the village, but the losses were devastating. I saw a soldier from our unit fall to the ground after being shot in the chest, his blood flowing profusely. I tried to help him, but I knew it was too late. I sat beside him, trying to calm his fears, but his eyes were gradually fading. This young soldier had just ended his life in that remote village, far from his homeland and family. When we returned to the base that night, we were physically and mentally exhausted. Each of us was trying to comprehend what had happened over the past few days. The feeling of loss and sorrow dominated everyone. We had lost comrades, witnessed death with our own eyes, and lived moments of sheer terror. There was no room for rest or relaxation. The war continued, showing no mercy to anyone. We moved early in the morning, ready to confront any threat. We were walking cautiously through the jungle, and every sound and movement made us stop and check our surroundings. I felt that every step I took could be my last. Fear resided within me, and this feeling made me more cautious than ever. When we arrived at the target area, we began to carefully comb the ground. The jungle was dense, and it was difficult to see anything clearly. Suddenly, we felt unusual movement among the trees. That movement stopped us, and we began to search for its source. We knew that the Viet Cong used this jungle to their advantage, which made us more vigilant. At that moment, we heard a loud explosion. The ground shook beneath our feet, and chaos erupted. It turned out that one of the soldiers had stepped on a landmine, and the explosion had knocked him to the ground. His screams tore through the silence, and blood was flowing from his wounds. We tried to provide first aid to him, but the situation was extremely bad. We had no time to think. The Viet Cong began firing at us from among the trees. We were surrounded on all sides, and we had no choice but to fight. We engaged them in a fierce battle, with bullets flying in every direction. The situation was extremely chaotic, and we didn't know if we would be able to get out of it alive. After long minutes of fighting, we managed to push the Viet Cong back. But we lost a number of soldiers in that battle. When it was all over, we stood in the middle of the jungle, exhausted and tired. Our faces were covered in dust and blood, and our bodies were weighed down by fatigue. The next day, we received orders to move to a new area. The objective was to reclaim a strategic position that had been taken by the Viet Cong days before. We knew that this mission would be difficult, but we had no choice but to comply with the orders. We moved slowly toward the target site, with caution being the order of the day. We were aware that the Viet Cong would try to defend the site with all their strength. We were advancing carefully, trying to avoid any ambush that might be set for us. Halfway there, I felt something strange under my feet. I stopped immediately and began to examine the area around me. It dawned on me that I had fallen into another trap. The ground beneath me looked slightly different, and there was a thin wire protruding from the grass. I tried to move cautiously, but I felt like I was trapped. At that moment, I heard my friends calling me, but I couldn't respond. I knew that any movement could trigger the trap. My heart was racing, and I felt as if time had stopped. I began to think about the options available to me, but there weren't many. Finally, I decided to ask for help. In a low voice, I called out to my comrades and informed them of my situation. They started to approach cautiously, trying to help me without triggering the trap. Time was passing slowly, and every moment felt like an eternity. They knew that the slightest mistake could cost me my life. Thanks to the experience of one soldier who knew how to deal with these traps, we managed to disable the trap very carefully. I was on the verge of collapsing from the stress, but I felt grateful to have emerged from this situation alive. This moment was a harsh lesson, but it made me more cautious and alert. After our success in disabling the trap, we decided to return to the base to resupply and get some rest. Everyone was feeling exhausted, and we needed to regain some energy before continuing the mission. But even with our return to the base, there was no room for true rest. Thoughts and memories haunted me, and I found it difficult to forget what had happened. At night, I tried to sleep, but the nightmares returned once again. I saw myself trapped in the jungle, trying to escape from the traps that surrounded me on all sides. I could hear the sounds of the Viet Cong approaching me, and bullets were flying around me. I kept waking up repeatedly, feeling like I couldn't breathe. Terror was creeping deep within me, and I couldn't shake it off. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted. Sleep had become a rare thing for me, and I was suffering from a constant feeling of anxiety and fear. I tried to ignore these feelings and focus on the task ahead of us, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. In the following days, we began preparing for a new mission. We knew this mission would be more dangerous than the last, and we were trying to be ready for all possibilities. There was a sense of anxiety prevailing among the soldiers, and we talked about the various possibilities of what might happen. In one of the meetings held to prepare us for the mission, we were informed that we would be in direct confrontation with the Viet Cong forces in an area known for its tunnels. These tunnels were used by the enemy to move invisibly, and they posed a significant threat to us. We knew we would be attacked from all sides, and we had to be ready to defend ourselves with all our strength. As preparations for the mission began, everyone worked with caution and precision, as if we were trying to delay a confrontation with a fate we knew could be inevitable. The orders were clear: move quickly and accurately to the known tunnel location, and destroy any Viet Cong activity we discovered there. These tunnels represented the lifeline for the enemy, as they could move easily and launch surprise attacks from unexpected places. We realized that this battle would be fierce, and perhaps the bloodiest since our arrival. We spent the last hours before moving checking equipment and preparing weapons. We made sure to carry enough ammunition and the necessary gear for the confrontation. I moved cautiously among my comrades, noticing the tense faces and determination mixed with fear. We all understood that we might not return from this mission, and this feeling of potential doom weighed heavily on all of us. In the evening, just before dawn, we received the order to move. The sky was unusually dark, and the atmosphere was suffocating, as if nature itself was anticipating what would happen. We moved in a long line, each soldier carrying a heavy burden on his shoulders, not only of equipment, but also of thoughts and fears that never left his mind. I was at the front of the line, trying to keep my eyes alert for any unusual movement or sound. After hours of walking through the jungle, the ground beneath our feet began to turn into softer soil, which was an indication that we were nearing the tunnels. The jungle here was denser, making visibility nearly impossible. The commander ordered us to stop periodically to assess the situation and listen carefully for any sound indicating the presence of nearby enemies. With every step, I felt the tension in my chest increase. I couldn't ignore the dark thoughts that haunted me. What if the Viet Cong were waiting for us inside? What if the tunnels were booby-trapped or set to collapse on us? These thoughts crept into my mind and suffocated me, but I had to push them away and focus on what lay ahead. Finally, we reached the first entrance to the tunnel. It was well hidden among the trees, visible only to those who knew its location. The commander asked us to stop while a small team began to cautiously explore it. I watched them as they approached the tunnel, and everything inside me screamed caution. I felt that something bad was about to happen. As the team cautiously advanced toward the entrance, what we feared occurred. A cleverly concealed explosive device detonated on one side of the tunnel. The explosion was deafening and caused chaos among us. I felt the ground shake beneath my feet, and the shockwave pushed me backward. When I regained my balance, I saw soldiers scattering in every direction, trying to take cover from the flying shrapnel. The battle erupted suddenly, as if the earth itself had exploded in anger. Bullets flew from all directions, and the Viet Cong began attacking us from inside the tunnels and among the trees. We were trapped, and the enemy had the advantage of position. The commander shouted orders to form defensive lines, but the situation was nearly out of control. I found myself lying on the ground, submerged in dirt and smoke. I was searching for a refuge to shelter in while bullets flew around me. The sounds blended together, the screams of soldiers, the sounds of explosions, and the surrounding nature as if it were silently watching this madness. I felt helpless, as if I were just a small pawn in a game much larger than myself. I began to crawl towards a group of large rocks that seemed to offer some protection. I didn't know how I had survived the chaos that ensued after the explosion, but I knew I had to move quickly if I wanted to stay alive. When I reached the rocks, I lay down behind them, trying to catch my breath. I looked around and saw my comrades trying to hold it together and respond to the attack. Some were injured, and some were trying to drag the wounded to safety. It was clear that we were facing a well-trained enemy who knew the area much better than we did. I tried to raise my weapon and start firing, but my hands were trembling from the stress. I saw a comrade close to me named Mike, who was trying to fix his jammed weapon while bullets whizzed past him. I shouted at him to come behind the rocks, but he didn't hear me because of the noise. I decided to crawl towards him to help, but before I could reach him, I saw bullets hit him in the chest. The scene was shocking. I froze in place for a moment, but soon regained my focus and tried to pull him to safety. I managed to reach Mike and drag him towards the rocks. He was breathing heavily, and blood was flowing from his wounds. I was trying to stop the bleeding in any way I could, but the situation was extremely bad. Mike was looking at me with eyes filled with terror, and he was trying to say something, but his voice was weak. At that moment, I felt completely helpless, as if I had lost the ability to help anyone. As we were trying to survive this hell, air support finally arrived. We heard the sounds of helicopters approaching, and they began firing at the Viet Cong positions. These aircraft represented our only hope of getting out of this predicament. But even with this support, the enemy clung to their positions and fought fiercely. The planes started dropping their bombs on the areas surrounding the tunnels, causing some to explode and seal off immediately. Smoke was rising everywhere, covering the sky with a thick cloud. But despite this, the fighting continued on the ground. The Viet Cong were appearing from unexpected places, launching surprise attacks before disappearing again. In the midst of the chaos, the soldiers began to reorganize. I received orders to join a group heading towards one of the side entrances to the tunnel. The mission was to clear this entrance and secure it so that other soldiers could enter the tunnel and search for any remaining enemies. When we reached the side entrance, darkness prevailed. We put on our helmets equipped with headlights and began to enter cautiously. The atmosphere inside the tunnel was suffocating, and the smell was foul, making it hard to breathe. The sounds of our footsteps echoed against the earthen walls, adding a touch of dread to the scene. We began to advance slowly, listening for any movement that might reveal the presence of the Viet Cong inside the tunnel. The enemy had constructed these tunnels in a way that made them resemble a maze, filled with traps and hidden places. I held my weapon tightly, ready for any confrontation that might occur at any moment. Episode 3? Available in the channel.